We're in the second week of a series that we started last week. That's because it's the second week, because we started last week, right? That'd be the first week, second week. Paying the gains. Because we all go through suffering. We all endure hardships in the course of our life. They say that without pain, there is no gain, but just because we have pain doesn't mean that we get gain, right? Sometimes we just hurt and it doesn't help. So how do we endure? How do we suffer in a way that if we have to suffer, that there's fruit that comes out of it? Suffering is a part of life. Heartache, heartbreak, trials, tribulations, they come. When the tough gets going, where are we going? Where are you going? You know, nearly everything in life that matters requires some measure of moxie, right? Determination, grit, resolve. Almost everything that matters. Right? If you want an education, you have to go to school and you have to study. And even if you're a good student, you know, you have that one teacher who just wants to make your life miserable. Or you have that one subject that you just can't get your brain around. And if you're not a good student, then you're looking at those people who are just complaining about that one bad teacher or that one bad subject, and you're saying, just shut up your bad selves, right? I have to struggle with all of it. If you want education, you're going to have some moxie. If you want to be an athlete, right? Every athlete has to train, has to learn and develop skills, has to strengthen their body. Every athlete at some time is going to go through a time where they have an injury and they have to fight back from an injury, or they're going to have that coach who doesn't treat them fairly, or they're going to have that ref who blows the call at the end of the game and costs you the championship, right? And do you come back or do you quit? Determination. Right? If you want to have a friend, at some point, that friend is going to disappoint you. They're going to let you down. They're going to stab you in the back, and you're going to have to decide: Am I going to stick with this friend, or am I going to walk away? If you want to be in a relationship with a significant other, there are going to be times that you have to go through some hard stuff. You're going to have to endure. You're going to have to persevere. When I talk to young couples on their way to the altar, I always tell them, you know, most people think that communication is the most important part of a relationship. Communication is really, really important. The most important part, if you want to have a lifelong relationship, is forgiveness. Because you are going to get hurt. You are going to get disappointed. Will you stick with it? Will you forgive? Will you press on? When I have kids, they're going to make you suffer. Let me repeat that. If you're going to have kids, you will suffer. Are you going to kick them at the curb? No, right? We endure, we persevere, we press on in our careers. Struggles like this, sometimes they cause us to question the fairness of life. Why does somebody get this? Why is it easier for some people than other people? But we persevere. Some of the struggles, some of the disappointments, some of the heartache in our life is just a natural progression of things. Sometimes we have to lose one thing to gain something else. Right? We have to lose the security of our homes if we want to gain the independence of being on our own. And sometimes those losses are hard to go through. We lose the freedom of our singleness to gain the intimacy of a marriage. We lose sleep and sanity to gain the honor and the privilege of raising kids. There's a continuity to these things. Loss and gain. But there's another kind of suffering, a kind of loss that's less frequent, but more devastating, more unpredictable, oftentimes irreversible. Things like terminal illness, disabilities, abuse, infertility, mental illness, chronic unemployment, crushing disappointment, the loss of a loved one. These things invade our lives and turn everything upside down. One of my mentors from way back earlier in my life is a man named Jerry Sitzer. And Jerry was in a tragic accident. Their car that his family was traveling in was hit head-on by a drunk driver. In a single moment, he lost his mother, his wife, and one of his daughters. He wrote a book called A Grace Disguised, and in that book, he says this about these kinds of losses, about the kind of loss that he experienced. That each new day forces one to face some new and devastating dimension of the loss. The losses are permanent, the impact incalculable, the consequences cumulative, creating a whole new context for one's life. These kinds of losses raise questions not just about the fairness of life, but about the meaning of life. Right? What is life? Is it even worth living? And about the existence of God. And if there is a God, is he a good God? Because if he is God, and if he is a good God, then why would he allow this to happen? Does he not care? Can he not do anything about it? And if you read the Bible and the stories that you find there, the people who encountered God, the people who walked with God, the people who believed in God, the people who trusted God with their lives, you will find that they are incredibly transparent about their frustrations, about their disappointments with God, about the ways that they feel like he didn't come through for them, and his inaction, what he didn't do, or his actions, what he allowed to happen. They don't hide anything. Jesus faced the darkest hour. He suffered at the deepest level. And you see that and you hear that in the words that he spoke. Before he was arrested that last night before his crucifixion, he takes his disciples and he goes to the prayer to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says to his disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me." 3 times he prays this prayer. When he's on the cross, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Have you ever felt forsaken by God? Jesus had that experience. The words that he spoke there, my God, why have you forsaken me, are actually first written in Psalm 22, hundreds of years before this time, before he spoke them. Some people think that Jesus was actually quoting the whole psalm. It goes on to say, "Why are you so far from saving me? So far from the words of my groaning. O God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, and you are silent." Have you ever felt that way? God, how can this happen? How can I be going through? Where are you? Why are you not hearing me? Why are you not answering my prayers? The story arc of the Bible ends with triumphant victory and a happily ever after. That's right. That's where it ends. You go to Revelation chapter 21, 22, there's this glorious victory at the end of a very long struggle. And in that time, a new heaven and a new earth, and no more pain or suffering or heartache or broken, no more tears. And the Bible, in that story arc towards this destination, says that we have the first fruits of this coming kingdom. Now, Paul says in 2 Corinthians, God has given us the Spirit as a deposit guaranteeing what is to come. We have the Spirit that he's given us that's saying, hey, this is coming for sure. It's the deposit saying it's coming, but it's not the full thing. We have the first fruits of the Spirit. What does the Spirit do? The Spirit gifts us with all the gifts that we need for all the things. Nope, the Spirit gifts the whole body with some of the gifts to accomplish what is coming in fullness down the road. The Spirit imparts to us the presence of God. Do we have a complete, full experience of the presence? No, we have a deposit on what's coming in the future. The Spirit infuses us with the life of God. Do we have it all? No, we have a deposit of what's coming. It ends in triumph. It ends with a happily ever after. We taste of it now. But the Bible also readily acknowledges that the journey from here to there is perilous and fraught with suffering. Sometimes burdens too great to bear. James, the brother of Jesus, writes, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. We count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Job, right, the Old Testament character who lost all of his family, all of his possessions, all of his servants, everything that he had in a single day, and goes through this dark night of the soul, has great friends who are there saying, hey, Job, you must have screwed up really, really bad that God allowed all these things to happen to you. And Job himself is like, God, what in the world? Where are you? Why are you not coming through for me? He curses the day that he was born. Paul, the apostle, talks of one of his experiences. He's saying to the church, we think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely on God who raises the dead. John, Jesus' beloved disciple, had a revelation. And he writes in this revelation, he has letters that are to each of the 7 churches in the province of Asia. And to each of the churches, he writes in these letters, and it's in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3. And each church, he writes to them about the struggles and the obstacles and the things that they're up against and the challenges that they're facing. And what he says to each of these churches at the end of the letter is a promise to those who overcome. Not a promise of peace and tranquility and happiness and wholeness today. A promise for those who overcome. See, suffering is inevitable. That was last week's lesson. Perseverance is indispensable. Where suffering is inevitable, perseverance is indispensable. In Hebrews chapter 10, the author writes, let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Let us not neglect the meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Let us hold on to the hope that we have of this end of the story that God has promised. And because it's not going to be easy for us to get there, we're going to have to hold on. Hey, you know what, church? We need each other too. We need to encourage each other. We need to motivate one another to love and good deeds. Persevere. He goes on from there in Hebrews chapter 11. And Hebrews chapter 11 is the story of, I call it the Faith Hall of Fame. And you meet in Hebrews chapter 11 all of the people from the Old Testament and the lives that they lived and the struggles that they went through and how they persevered. You find Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and the judges and David. And it celebrates all these people who endured hardship, who persevered in the face of struggle. And then after talking about all these people and how they held on and held out, waiting for the promise that God had given them, Hebrews chapter 12, it says, now this is their story, but their story is your story. And he writes, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and we have these saints who have gone before us, let us throw off everything that hinders us, the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us run our leg with the same perseverance that they ran their leg with, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Paul writes, we glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. We need perseverance to endure suffering. But Paul says more than that. He also says that the suffering that we've endured is producing perseverance. The suffering that we've endured is producing the perseverance that we need for the suffering that is yet to come. So, helicopter parents, moms and dads, right? We don't want our kids to go through hard things. We want to rescue them and save them from all the hardships so they don't have to do the things that we do and have to go through the things that we do. We don't want them to hurt. And we don't want to hurt, and we don't want to struggle. And Paul says you need those things to learn, to develop the tenacity, the grit, the perseverance that you're going to need to face future obstacles and struggles. Life is hard. And all the things in our lives are tools and instruments that God is using us to mold us and shape us and to prepare us for what lies ahead. Do not despise the day of small things. Do not despise the little things you're going through right now that may be the very things that you need to prepare you for the things that will happen in the future. Pain that gains doesn't quit. Pain that gains doesn't quit. I read a moment ago from Paul's letter to the church at Corinth when he talked about being overwhelmed. He says in 2 Corinthians 1 verse 9, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God who raises the dead. We thought we were going to die. We thought it was over. We thought we were goners. But we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God. A lot of times, the title is the very last thing I write of my sermon. And sometimes, this time, right? The better title for this message didn't even come when I titled it. It came this morning, right? Pain that gains doesn't quit. Paul actually takes that a step farther and says, pain that gains taps in, not out. Pain that gain taps in, not out. Taps in to God. Taps in to the Spirit. Stops relying on itself. And believes that even if I don't survive this, I still have hope. Why? Because God even raises the dead. Pain that gain taps in, not out. Paul had another experience. He writes about where he had a thorn in his flesh, and he never tells us what the thorn is, but he went through some kind of suffering. And he pleaded with God to take this suffering from him, similar to what Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? Please take this suffering from me. 3 times he asked God. And God answers Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. I'm not taking this suffering away. Tap in, not out. What you need is my Spirit, and that will be enough for you to go through what you have to go through. So Paul says, therefore, I boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Right? That's counterintuitive, right? I boast about my weaknesses because it is in my weakness that God's power is infusing me to live the life that he's called me to do. To die, Paul says, it's part of the journey. It's part of the journey. But as long as I'm alive, as long as I'm on the planet, I'll live for you. Hebrews 10 talks about this journey, suffering. 11, we have the Faith Hall of Fame. Hebrews chapter 12 calls us to remember those who have gone before us. And he goes on from there, says, endure hardship as discipline. Endure hardship as discipline. Now, when I think of discipline, I think my default is, hey, when you're disciplining, it's like punishment, right? It's when your kids are bad and you give them a timeout, or parents in the old days used to like spank them and stuff like that. I remember. Some of you remember. If I was bad, I occasionally got a swat. If I was bad in church, I got the belt. It's child abuse now, but here I am, right? But discipline is not just punishment, right? If you want to run a race, if you want to study, discipline is like putting in the time. It's doing the work to prepare you for what you want to do. And it's not even saying, hey, all the hardship that you take upon is like God doing something to you, God punishing. It's saying, whatever hardship you go through, receive it as something that God can use in your life to instruct you, to train you, to equip you. That at some point, we have to move past why. Why is this happening, God? Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? Why did you allow this? Who are you? Where are you? At some point, we have to move past the why question. Hebrews says to ask the what question. God, what can I learn from this? God, how can I grow from this? God, what can I take away from this that will help me become the person that you want me to be, to live the life that you want me to live, to do the things that you want me to do, to move past why, to ask what and how, endure hardship, learn from it. He goes on to say, God is treating you as his children. He's a father, right? Fathers discipline their children. How much more then should we submit to the Father of the spirits and live? If our earthly fathers discipline us for good, God's our heavenly Father. Do we not trust him even more? Is he not a better father than the earthly father that we have? How much more should we then trust him? Submit to the Father. Submit. Receive it. Come beneath his teaching, his instruction. God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in his holiness. Take a look at that. God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in his holiness. See, that's what I want, is for God to share in my happiness. That's cool. I pray, I want to be happy, and I would just love it if you would be happy with me. And he was saying God has a different agenda. Right? His ultimate agenda is not your happiness, first and foremost. He says, endure hardship as discipline. God's disciplining you as his children so that you can share in his holiness. But the catch is this. To be holy is to be whole. To be whole is to be who it is that God meant for you to be, who it is that God created you to be. To be whole is to be your truest self. And is not your truest self also your happiest self? John Eldredge, one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called The Utter Relief of Holiness. The utter relief of not going to bed at night and having any regrets, any fears, any doubts about who you are or where you are, no matter what you're going through. The utter relief of holiness. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." I hunger and thirst for 1,000 different things that never satisfy. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, Jesus says, and you will be satisfied. You will be filled. Hebrews goes on to say, verse 11, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful." Well, we know that for sure, right? It's painful at the time. But later on, key word, right? Later on. What we're going through now, right now, what you're enduring right now, the struggles that you're living through right now, is not the end of the story. Later on, there's more to come. Later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Verse 12, "Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed." Now, this is not, I'm going to say something here. This is not the first thing it says. This is the last thing it says, right? But it's like, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Suck it up, buttercup. Because God intends to use you and me so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. He is strengthening us so that we can help in the healing and restoration of others. It's not just about you. It's not just about your hardship. It's not just about your struggle. He's training us, strengthening us, preparing us, equipping us. And Hebrews comes to the point, it's like, come on, you got this. You've got this. But you can't sit around and wallow forever. Strengthen your feeble knees, your weak knees. Get up. Now, I want to close with two cautions. The first one is this. This message, the words I'm speaking to you today, timing matters. Timing matters a lot. This is not what you offer people who are in the throes of tragedy. Right? You don't tell a mother who's grieving the loss of a child, God is going to use this to make you holy. Timing matters. If that's where you are today, right? If you are in the throes of tragedy and suffering, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. Gentle, humble. I will give you rest for your souls. If you're in the throes of tragedy today, Jesus says, come. I am here for you. I will hold you. I will help you. But if you've been stuck there for a long time, in that place, for years, for decades, it might be a good time to ask a different question. It might be time to stop asking why and start asking what. Okay, first caution, timing matters. The second is this. Comparisons, when it comes to suffering, are not helpful. Suffering is not distributed equitably on the planet. We all know that, right? We see some people go through horrendous things, and some of us have been through horrendous things, and sometimes it just seems like one wave comes after another, after another, after another. Not all hardships are equal. Not everybody has to bear the same burden. Jerry Sitzer, who I mentioned earlier, after he lost his mother and his wife and his child, he writes this. He says, I instantly became a celebrity. Someone whose loss could not be imagined or surpassed. People would come up to him and say, I know people have suffered, but nothing compared to you. Nothing compared to what you went through. He himself says, but don't do that. Experiences of suffering can't be compared. He writes, my loss was sudden and traumatic, my suffering immediate and intense. But the consequences were clear immediately, and I knew what I had to deal with. I knew what I had to overcome. I knew what I had to go through. Different, he says, than his cousin who was suffering from incurable cancer. Her loss was gradual and subtle. The landscape of her life changed not all at once, but was destroyed slowly over time. She never knew what the next day was going to bring. He talks about other things, like he lost the three people, but if one of them had survived but had life-altering injuries, brain damage, that would have been a different kind of suffering. He says, suffering, comparisons are not helpful. Because here's the thing. If we lose the comparison, right, my suffering's not as bad as your suffering. We're deprived of the validation that we need to identify the experience as loss and grieve it and go through it. If my suffering's not as bad as yours, then why am I even thinking about it? Why am I even talking? It's no big deal. Well, what if it is a big deal? But it's not that big a deal, but it still matters. If we invalidate the real suffering in our lives, and we don't learn from it. We get stuck in it. And if we win the comparison game, we convince ourselves that no one has suffered as much as us. And if no one has suffered as much as us, then no one can understand and no one can help. And Sitzer writes, they indulge themselves in their pain and gain a strange kind of pleasure in their misery. Neither place is a good place to be. Pain that gains recognizes that in this world you will have trouble. Jesus was unequivocal. In this world you will have trouble. Just take heart, because I have overcome the world. Tap in to the Spirit, to the life of God, to the love of God. Persevere, press on. Don't tap out. Lord, I pray for people who are in the throes of suffering this morning, Lord. I pray that they would know that their cries are not landing on deaf ears, that you hear, that you know they're suffering, that you understand suffering because you suffered. I pray that they would know your presence. And on the days when they cannot find the strength within themselves to go on, Lord, that they would fall into your arms and experience the sufficiency of your grace and your power being perfected in their weakness. Help them get through another day. Surround them with people who will hold them when they can't hold themselves up anymore. May we be a church that is your hands and feet to people who are suffering. And Lord, for the things that we're going through right now, I pray that we would submit. As we endure, that we would submit to your training, to your instruction. That you would teach us and help us to learn and grow. That our weak arms and feeble knees might be strengthened, that we might bring healing and life to others. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.